This is ST 589 again, lecture 18 of Fundamentals of Information Technology. We're going to look at security with on your computer and computers in general. A little bit about ethics and privacy. We're not going to cover much on ethics here. It's a topic that I find very interesting, but we're probably going to stick more to the concrete things here. A little bit about ethics and privacy, just a little bit about that. And we're going to cover more than that, actually, but that's how we're going to title it. We're also talking about some physical aspects of computer use and security, and not only software, soft security, but computer security in general. All right, let's take a look at the objectives. I can get my slides to advance here. There we go. So we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at viruses, and you've all heard that term. We're going to look at worms. You don't hear that term as much as you used to. And we're going to look at Trojan horses and what they do, how to protect yourself against them. We're going to look at botnets, what those are a little bit, and denial of service attacks, backdoors, spoofing. All terms you've probably heard before, but we're going to talk about them in a little more detail. And we're talking about how you prevent people from using computers, if you want to, unauthorized use. And hard security. And software theft. I'm going to cover that briefly because it's something we all know about, and probably everybody here has done it at one time or another. But you shouldn't do it. System failures, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Wireless communication is, of course, an area that is really opening in terms of the idiots that like to write viruses and attack systems and so forth. And it's something we like, so we use it a lot, and security has been kind of a little bit lacking. We'll talk just briefly about that. Privacy, as I said, health-related types of things. So a security risk on a computer is pretty much the same thing as any security risk. If you want to secure a building, you secure the perimeter. And you only allow people into that building that should be into that building. The question, of course, is how do you do that completely? Because you have to have access. You have to have people coming and going. And the people that come and go, you have to trust them to a certain extent. And then you also have to kind of look at them. So this is kind of what we do with computers. We control the perimeter of the computer as much as we can. But of course, you can't build a wall around a computer. You can lock it down so nobody can pick it up and carry it off. You can put chains on it. But you have that connection via network or internet coming in and out of your computer, something you really have to take care of. And of course, the only way you can really take care of that is with some kind of software-related wall, perimeter guard. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, the other thing, if you think about a building, is if it's a very secure building, like a military high clearance building, and let's assume that's how we want our computer to be, you'll also have people indoors looking around, making sure everything's running okay, and everybody kind of knows everybody else. They're going to know strangers in there, and you also are only allowed access to the areas you want to have access. You can do a similar kind of thing on your computer. You're also going to take a look at your computer once in a while. We have guards that move around corporate buildings in the evenings, checking the buildings. Similar thing on your computer. There's software that's going to stroll through your hard disk, if you will, looking for intruders. Because even with the best security, occasionally something gets through. Somebody gets very creative and gets around your wall you've built, and you're going to have things cruise also and take a look. So you have virus attacks, internet and network attacks. System failure, well, about 15 minutes ago, our system, the one I'm working on right now, crashed because of a lightning strike here on campus. The Adobe Connect server was fine, but this system, we had to reboot. So a system failure, in a sense, is a security risk in that if your computer is doing security, if it's not running, you've lost something. Companies lose money when computers go down. Information theft. That's an area you don't think about in terms of computer security, but that's really what it is. Since we have all the information digitized, available to people from a distance, that means somebody from a distance can steal the information. And so security, in that sense, you can steal information, and it happens all the time. You read an article in the Wall Street Journal or something where somebody stole a laptop from a credit card company that has 100,000 credit card numbers on it. And of course, that means they can sell that to the people in Kazakhstan or Russia, and they can make a lot of money off that. And so it goes. Hardware theft, that's kind of obvious. Software theft, sorry. I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to think of that as hurting the company that it's stolen from. Your employees, your students, your staff take software and they install it on their own computer. That's theft. The question is, how does it affect me as a manager of a department here at Tech? How do you take care of that, or how does it affect me? Well, in a sense, it doesn't affect me, but you still have to be very careful with it, because if an audit happens and it's found that software that you're responsible for is installed somewhere where it shouldn't be installed, you can actually get a very hefty fine, $100,000 or more for each instance. It doesn't happen very often, but there are occasionally the software industry, the feds, Federal Trade Commission, somebody will do an audit of a large corporation and they'll get fined $500,000 for software theft just to make the point. So it does happen. And of course, in theory, it hurts the people that wrote the software. They have a right to make money off that software. And if you let somebody use yours, they've lost that revenue, supposedly. So it is theft. Most of you probably can't, but I remember the days when cable TV first came in, and people, myself included, were just very angry that we had to pay for it. We just thought TV should be free, and you used to see your neighbors crawling up telephone poles to tap into the cable all the time because people felt that was a fine thing to do because they had no right to charge for something that should be free. But of course, they weren't charging for the free service, they were charging for the cables. But we didn't see it that way at first. And of course, now you don't see much of that. People still steal the signal, they just don't climb telephone poles and do it that way. The cable industry's gotten a little better at their security. So internet network attacks, you've got to have that gateway for something to get in. And the first one we're going to talk about is viruses. And let me go over here to the whiteboard here. So we've got our cloud of the internet. And you have an idiot who likes to write software. You can compare these people to people that drive around, knock down mailboxes, or throw rocks through windows. You know, I don't know what kind of loser they are, but they're not dumb, but they are idiots. And then you have your computer here. Now something, and of course you have your connection to the internet. The internet being what it is, even idiots can have access to the internet. So, of course, the information passes through this cloud. And if there's a virus, this person writes the virus on their computer. It's actually a program. So they write the virus. And that has to be a pretty sophisticated piece of programming. It has to take advantage of things like the way Windows works. You have to understand how the operating system loads programs, how the operating system reads disks, how the operating system reads USB drives. All of those things, because like any kind of leech, any kind of animal or plant that lives off of other people or other creatures, the virus has to be sent somehow. It has to be on top of something else and move along. You ever seen films of sharks? They have these eels that kind of attach to the sharks, and they eat the crumbs the shark leaves. Well, virus is similar to that. Somebody just doesn't dial up and put a virus on your computer. It has to have a vehicle of some kind to get it moved from this computer to you. So there's a little bit of code, and it takes advantage of little holes in Windows or little holes in browsers, especially Internet Explorer. And of course, that's the most often attacked software is Internet Explorer and Windows. Why is that? Well, it's the old magic number that I've talked about before. 90% plus of the computers in the world run Windows and use Internet Explorer. 90% by count, number of computers. So if you're an idiot that likes to, throw rocks through windows and pee on people's cars and so forth, why would you go after any other software? Because you're going to get the biggest bang out of your buck to attack Windows and Internet Explorer. So this is why people use other software. A lot of people use Mozilla. It's a browser we've talked about before. Or Mosaic is another browser you don't hear much about, but people use it. Why? Because people that write malware, it's called. Another general term for all of this stuff we're talking about. Mal being bad, Latin for bad. Yeah, and instead of software, it's badware, malware. People that write that stuff aren't going to write much of it for Mozilla or Mosaic. Opera is another browser. They're going to write it for where they get the biggest bang of their buck, which is Windows Explorer and Windows itself. So that's another reason a lot of people are thinking about going to Macs because there's fewer viruses, fewer security needs on the Mac than there are on the Windows computers. People don't write a lot of viruses for Macs. So there has to be a vehicle to get that virus in there. Now, it could be somebody hands you a USB drive. Let me see if I can get this pen to work a little better there. So a USB drive. And they give it to you and say, hey, I got some photos on here I want you to have. Well, the virus could be on that. So it could be a hardware transfer. It could be somebody shares a disk drive with you, those kinds of things. Or you could download something. And most often, that's email. But it could be anything. There are cases years ago, even when companies sold software on floppy disks and CDs, where software would come from the plant with viruses on it. And there are a couple cases of that. It happens. Or you download software from a site that you've paid for, and it has a virus in it. It happens. Not often, but it does happen. They're pretty secure about that now. So usually it's email. So how does the idiot get the virus into the email? Well, they have to actually send the email originally. So usually what they do is if they get a spam, they may respond to it with the virus, and that infects the spam server. And the spam, as you know, is a message. The content really is not important for spam. Spam is a message that goes out too many times. So the message might be a good one, but if it goes out too many times to too many anonymous people, it becomes spam, no matter what it is. So spam is email that's going to people anonymously, or people that you don't know send you email. So the idea is to get it out here somewhere. Once the virus is attached to an email out here, and you get that email circulating in the cloud, other people are going to get that email and going to get that virus. So just like any form of contagion, there has to be a way to move it. Contagion, human diseases pass through touching of hands, sneezing, breathing, those kinds, even drinking water sometimes. So there has to be a media. So it has to be something you bring inside your computer. Okay? So if that's the case, how do we stop it? Well, we build a wall. And one of those pieces of software or concept we talk about is a firewall. Now, a firewall is something that's in building construction, and it's actually a wall of flame retardant or flame resistant material that by code has to be put periodically throughout buildings. So if there is a fire in that building, the fire doesn't go right through the building, it gets to the firewall and it will stop or at least slow down. Your car has one between the engine and the passenger compartment of the car. Firewalls are physical things. Well, in this case, of course, it's software. Although there are firewall software, hardware combinations. People sell more or less servers or routers that have the firewall embedded in the hardware with the software embedded as firmware, much like read-only memory, ROM we talked about, comes on the computer from the factory. So there's hardware that has a firewall built right into it. So that's one way, and that means every message that comes in passes through the firewall, and the firewall can reject it once it reaches here, the virus. And if the firewall has virus stuff, it'll block messages that you tell it to block. And you can create a list of those. And normally you can subscribe or you get software that runs on the firewall that has a database that tells it anything from these IP addresses or this domain name. We talked about domain names, I think, last time. That's where in the internet the message is originating. Shouldn't pass the firewall. And the firewall just says, well, that can't come in. And it doesn't. There's software associated with it. So you can build this database, and the software associated with the firewall allows you to put things in there. Taking it a step further, just so we can talk about the concept for a minute, there are parental controls some people use, and it's actually part of that firewall concept. There's software that has a database of sites that someone decides are not suitable for children, and they put that in the database, and the parents buy that software in that database and subscribe to that database, and their children can't look at those sites. The firewall just blocks them. So that type of security goes beyond just viruses. You can control it any way you want. In fact, China, recently, that's been in the news, trying to block what's coming into their country. All of the internet. That China controls the internet cabling. Somewhere along the way there has to be something coming in received by a piece of hardware somewhere in the country, and then it goes out. Well, all of those sources of the internet, theoretically including satellite, is controlled by the Chinese government. So if the signal comes from outside China to those hardware devices, they can put a firewall in there that might block out everything that related to Tiananmen Square, especially on a certain day, for instance, or anything to do with democracy, or anything to do with whatever it is they don't want people to see. So that means if you go to Google in China and do a search on Tiananmen Square, the results are going to look a little different than if you do the same search in the United States. Because there is no censoring, there is no firewall around the United States. China is trying to control their internet access by doing that. Is it 100%? By no means. But it does limit what comes into the country. They use a similar technology. So the firewall, every message coming from the cloud of the internet has to be passed by the firewall before it gets to your computer. And you can modify and you can customize what the firewall does to your taste. You can turn on the parental control. You can turn it off when you get on so you can see sites perhaps that are a little more adult. It could just be as simple as Rolling Stone magazine, whatever your choice is. You don't want your kids to see it, but you might want to see it. And you can turn that on and off. There's nothing hard-coded about that. So that's one thing. The firewall is one way to protect against things like viruses. But if that little program does get over here, who cares? Well, what a virus will do to your computer, it varies. Some of them, all they do is take up resources. So my mother had a computer, for instance, and she was doing fine with it. She's in her 80s, but after a couple years, she didn't really have any virus protection on it or firewall. After a couple of years, it started running so slow she couldn't use it, and I went up and installed a virus checker. And she had like 187 viruses on there, and she had a lot of other things we're going to talk about later. So what happens is all your resources, including, interesting that switches, but, RAM. Viruses take up room in RAM. CPU, well, they are programs, so they take up time. They're talking out here via the internet, so bandwidth. All those things are used by the viruses. So even if they're not doing anything specifically destructive to your computer, and many of them don't, they're just nuisances, they're using the resources on your computer, slowing it down, making it hard to use, those kinds of things. So that's something to think about. So the virus can do that, or some of them will pop up. I haven't seen many of these in years, but it used to be one would pop up and say, I want a cookie, I'm the cookie monster. Yeah, it seemed kind of funny at first. It had audio with it. But if that ever comes up when you have 15 minutes to complete a presentation for the CEO of your company, it comes up and you have to type a certain word to get past it, which might be monster, cookie monster or something, and you don't know that, that's pretty stressful. You want to just find the idiot that wrote that virus and strangle that person, or at least, damage them around the ears, because they just caused you to miss a presentation. Funny. It's not funny. So there's resources, there's that. Some viruses will actually delete files. There was one years ago that would cause your hard disk to spin back and forth till it failed. They can do a lot of things. The key is to keep them out. There's other things you can do besides the firewall. Of course, there's obviously antivirus software. 2 years ago, we were using Norton, but Norton has gotten so bad, we've uninstalled it everywhere off all our computers, and we use a free piece of antivirus software called Avast. Seems to work pretty well. Antivirus sits here on your computer, and after the messages get through the firewall, you can turn on this antivirus that looks at everything coming in and out of your computer and figures out if there's a virus there or not, anything unusual, odd. And you can set that up so it'll give you a warning, or you can just have it delete it or not allow it. There's a lot of settings you can change in there, but the key is, of course, it's looking at everything coming in before it allows it to get into RAM. Well, it's in RAM, but before it allows it to get into where you can see it. So that's another form of protection. Antivirus also can just run on your computer and check these hard disk and RAM. Some viruses reside in RAM, not the hard disk, or they're in a different form on RAM than in the hard disk. So most antivirus checks your memory or RAM first, then scans the whole hard disk if you ask it to, or you can tell it to scan just specific parts. But you want it to look at the whole thing, and it's looking for a virus signature, a footprint, a set of O's, zeros, and ones. That tells it, oh, that's this virus. And then in its database, the antivirus has a database, which you need to update periodically because the vendor, in my case it's free, but the people that put it out update their database constantly. They have what they call, honey jars. I think that's what they're called. They're computers they leave out on the internet with no protection, but they're not connected to any network, of course, just the internet. And they just, have somebody browse, just sit there, and what they do is they attract viruses, malware, and they get loaded on that computer, and then they pull it into an isolated network and they study it. And they figure out how to get a footprint for all the horrible stuff on that computer, and then they put those into their database. It's a constant, ongoing process. That's one of the expenses of doing business as an antivirus software company. You've got to continually keep up with the idiots. When you stop and consider the amount of money we're all spending and time, I have to scan every computer I have here, download the updates, scan every computer at least once a week. I miss sometimes, but I try to do it once a week, and it's very time consuming. It takes over half a day. And it slows down the computers while it's running. Somebody has to write the software. You've got to update the databases. Somebody has to find all the viruses. It's costing us a lot of time and money. And it's not cute. It's not funny. It's a real problem. So there's a basic diagram of what's going on and ways you can protect yourself. We'll go over this again via the PowerPoints here. So that's a virus. A worm is very similar. Except that it keeps copying itself on the same computer. And it will also copy itself on anything it can find on the network locally. So once it's inside your network, it just keeps passing it around. And the other thing is a worm can do all kinds of things. Uses resources, shuts down the computer. There was a worm years ago that only attacked Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. And it would go in and find cells, and it would randomly change the value of cells by a random amount. So if you had all your accounting in an Excel spreadsheet and you got that particular worm, you would bring the spreadsheet up the next day and it would work fine, but the data was different and you may not even notice it. If it changed it by 1%, 3%, you might, over time start wondering, what the heck, that doesn't seem right. I don't remember that being that way yesterday, but it works fine. And why would somebody change? You know what I'm saying? It's very subtle. That's the kind of thing these people do with worms. And they just are like a worm infestation. Once they get started, they just keep multiplying. And they call them worms because they're kind of underground. And some of them don't do really obvious damage. Some of them do. A Trojan horse is something that looks like a regular old program. A virus is a program, but it's a hidden kind of program. Trojan horse is something you might purposely download thinking, well, that's nice. Here's some freeware that allows you to play digital copies of your music for free. Well, that's nice, but what the other thing it's doing is installing some kind of malware on your computer. Normally, they do other functions to get onto your computer. That's why they're called Trojan horses. You know the mythology. Greeks got into Troy by hiding inside a wooden horse, left it as a gift to the gods. The Trojans opened the gate, took the horse in, they came out of the horse and took the... So that's the idea. You actually allow often the Trojan horse to get through your firewall and your security, and then you get infected. They look legitimate. This is the kind of thing when you get... I got one today I've never gotten. It was said I'd won the Irish sweepstakes, 1.350 million pounds was mine. All I had to do was click on this link. Well, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, as they say. Trojan horse. If I had clicked on that link, I would have probably gotten something loaded on my computer, or would have stolen something off my computer, like my social security number, if it were there, my credit card number, those kinds of things. That's a Trojan horse. Those are the three major terms we talk about. And here's a better diagram than mine, I suppose. They don't call them idiots, they call them unscrupulous, because they are writing a textbook. Create virus program that deletes all your files. And there's a good example. You can hide a virus in a picture. You need a program to look at a picture, a JPEG, a digital picture. So a program opens that file, which has zeros and ones in it. Well, some of those zeros and ones are a program, essentially. Not all just a picture. So often any attachment, when you look at an email, you haven't done any damage to your computer unless you have your email set up to open the attachments automatically. But if you just have the email pop up and you look at the subject and who sent it, you haven't done any damage until you normally open the attachments. It's not 100% true, but that's a good rule of thumb. You don't know who it's from, don't open it. Just delete it. It's kind of a funny diagram. This is a bad person. They opened their email attachment, and they're infected. Here's the good person. She wearing a burqa is the good person and didn't open her email, so she didn't get infected. So, you know, there's some kind of lesson there, I guess. I'm not going to play this video, but if you get a chance, you might watch it. It's very interesting. There's an editor from CNET, which is a website, software company that does reviews of software and hardware and so forth. And he talks about what's going on in terms of cell phones. Cell phones aren't really cell phones, as we've talked about. They're actually computers now, and they have operating systems. And in the US, you don't see a lot of viruses being passed. That probably is going to change as the cell phone industry consolidates. But in Europe, they've adopted one major operating system for most of Europe, which of course goes back to the old mentality. If most of the software or most of the hardware is using a certain operating system, viruses get written. And he explains in the video how these viruses get sent. You're at a ball game and your phone rings and you want to answer it, or you need to call the office, and you look at the display and it says, "Do you want to accept this message?" And you say, "No," ignore. Boom, pops right back up. No, pops back up. No, pops back up. So you can't use your phone. And most people get just upset because they need to make a call and they say, "Sure, I'll accept it." Oh, now I can use my phone. What you've just done is loaded a virus into your phone. Has the same impact as we talked about for computer viruses. Phone's a computer. And how it's being sent now is via Bluetooth from one cell phone to another. So it could be the person sitting, 2 rows down from you at the baseball game. Their phone sent it to yours via Bluetooth. So be careful about accepting those kinds of things. And if your phone has the setting, you should probably turn Bluetooth off unless you're using it. Same with your computer. Don't just turn off Bluetooth unless you really need it. Then those kind of things don't happen. But it's kind of an interesting video. If you get a chance, you might look at it. If it doesn't work, let me know. A macro virus. Well, we talked a little bit about macros earlier when we were talking about Office. Well, macro is a kind of a way to take commands of something like Microsoft Excel or Word, and you tell Excel, you press a certain number of keys and it says record what I'm about to do. And then you type in a certain set of keystrokes, which include down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, right arrow, type of value, those kinds of things, tab, tab, tab. And it's recording everything you do, every keystroke. So it's a mini program. And then you say, okay, save that macro, and you give it a name. That means you can run that macro whenever you want. So if it's something you do over and over and over again, you can create a program in Excel called a macro. Well, that was, of course, one of the ways people have figured out how to attack computers. That's the way they get into computers, is macros. So you'll upload an Excel macro that runs when you open spreadsheets, and it wasn't one you wrote because it's a virus. So they're suggesting here that you turn off macros in your spreadsheets. Well, that's great if you don't use them, I guess, but some people use them. So at least you get a warning is what they're suggesting here. Set the macro security level so you get a warning at the least. So that's a macro virus, and they are out there. I actually have never seen one, but I've read about them. Antivirus program. I mentioned Avast. There's a lot of them out there. We use McAfee on our servers here. We don't use free ones. We use McAfee's. There's a firewall and a virus program as well. So on our Breeze server and our other servers, we have that software protecting us, and we pay for that. But that's a good one. I don't recommend Norton anymore, although you see it a lot still in the industry literature. So perhaps it's the way I was using it. They protect you. How do they do that? We mentioned it earlier. Filter everything that comes through, and then periodically you run a scan. Look at everything on your computer, compare it against a database of images, and see if those bits are the same. If they are, that's this kind of virus, and this is how I get rid of it. Okay. That's what we're talking about here, a specific pattern of virus code called a virus definition. Here's a picture of Norton on this slide here. So it's looking for the signature. It has a database of signatures. Usually you set it up so it pops up and says, I found this particular virus, tells you what it is. The McAfee and others should have a panel explaining what the virus is, what it does, gives you options. And we'll look at those options on a slide here in a minute. So here's some tips. We talked about setting the macro, antivirus, never open an email application, delete the attachment, delete email, check everything. In other words, run it through your antivirus software, and have a firewall. We've talked about those. So here's the options I was talking about a minute ago. You can delete the files. Well, that's normally what I do, but that is tricky if they have put the virus inside a piece of Windows software, for instance, that you need, like a driver. Although that happens rarely these days. It used to happen a lot, but they've gotten better at protecting those system files now. It's very rare these days. But if it does, or in your registry, which is where a lot of software parameters are stored in a database for Windows to access, it might not make sense to delete them, but I usually do that and haven't had any problems because most viruses aren't infecting those files anymore. Some viruses you can't delete because they have some weird kind of file structure, or they protect themselves. If the Windows command that deletes files tries to delete that file, it blocks it. I mean, these things are sophisticated, but that doesn't stop us. It used to. Now they've added a function called quarantine, so they move the file somewhere that it'll never be accessed again by the system. The virus software keeps track of it, but Windows never sees that file anymore. It's not part of the Windows operating system. It's only seen by the antivirus software. So it's quarantined like people that have a disease. You set them aside so no one else catches it. It's on your computer, but it never runs. No one else it can't infect anybody else. There's a couple other security risks. Denial of service attack. Well, that was in the news recently as well. Japan, United States, some websites were attacked with a denial of service attack. What that means is you send so many messages at a web server that it gets overwhelmed and essentially freezes and locks up. And you just have programs that just keep hitting the website, type. It works in a similar fashion as if you had 8 billion people typing the same address into the browser at the same time. It just kept hitting enter. I need the data you have. I need the data. They do it with programs, of course, although China could probably do it with people, but they don't. The denial of service that happened recently, most people, including our government, think Korea did it, trying to just stretch their muscles a little bit. It didn't work very well. We're pretty sophisticated these days. When denial of service attacks first started, we weren't ready for them, like most of these things, and some servers were shut down. It happened to me at Kinko's. One of my servers was shut down by a disgruntled employee. And the way we handled it is we created 2 identical servers. You can do this kind of things when you have the money, Kinko's does. So if one of them got to a certain threshold, we had some software that tried to decide if we were getting a denial of service attack. We would just switch over to the other one. They had the same IP address, but one of them was disabled until that one got attacked. Then we would switch over. Backdoor, that's something that sits inside another program that allows you to bypass security. Most programmers put that into code while they're testing it. Most of you don't remember it, but there was a movie called War Games years ago where a kid was hacking into software company computers trying to get the new video games before anybody else, and he inadvertently got into a military computer that thought it was playing a game but was actually going to launch missiles and so forth. So he had to get back in, tell it to shut off, but no one believed him. So he had to find the person that wrote the operating system, because he had left a back door, which was his daughter's, he got into it somehow with his daughter's birthday or something. So programmers put that in there in case when they're testing the security, if you're testing the security and the security is so good you can't get into the system, how do you change things? So backdoor allows you to get in and turn off the security. In this case, what they're talking about as well is a program that's embedded in another program. Don't even know it's there. The other program runs normally, and all of a sudden, bloop, this other program operates. Because it's operating under the guise of the trusted program, security ignores it. It gets to do it at once. Spoofing is a way to try to fool the security software. The IP address is not the one that's really sending it. There's ways to spoof that. In other words, a false IP address. You get the same thing with cell phones now. You can spoof the number that's being sent. It's just ways to appear different than you are. Spoofing even includes stuff that messages, email, downloads that look like something that they're not. So they appear legitimate. We just talked about that fools are now into believing its IP address is from somewhere else. The folks in Kazakhstan and Russia are doing this constantly. They look like they're coming from Georgia or something, but they're not. They're coming from, when the federal government investigates those, they find them eventually tracked back to Kazakhstan or somewhere. You'll also see spoofing when you get an email that says this is from Bank of America. Another term for these is phishing, PH. We'll look at that in a minute. But the idea is the web, there's a link there that says Bank of America. It has their logo. Everything looks legitimate. But if you move the mouse over it, you'll see that the URL, the web address, is not Bank of America. It's something else. So it looks like a real website, but it's not. It's something else, which is going to hurt you with malware. So be careful of those. I fell for one of those when they first came out. I think everybody probably does. So you realize how it works. Here's a picture of the firewall. Here's the firewall. Here's a software firewall, and here's a hardware firewall. And there's both versions. The hardware, of course, works quicker. And the other advantage of firewall I didn't mention earlier, but companies like them because they also keep track of the websites being visited. They do that for security reasons. If a problem pops up, they can go into the log and say, well, what sites were being visited when we got infected? Okay, we need to block those. However, you can also use those, of course, to see what your employees are looking at. And if somebody's going to a site they shouldn't go to from work, they can actually track that to their desk because they know the IP of the desk system. Remember, every computer on the internet has a unique IP address. So that computer on your desk, they can track it. So be careful with that. If you're doing something you shouldn't do, be careful about that because the firewall logs everything. Now, they don't normally do anything. However, if something comes up, they can go into the log and say, well, yeah, in fact, you did visit these sites. We have it right here in our log. So, and they also use that, of course, to analyze. Maybe it's okay to let people do things at work. Some sites, some companies block Facebook, MySpace, but let you use email. Those kinds of things. So it allows them to customize what's coming into the company. And a lot of people were upset about that when they first did it. But when you think about it, they're right. They're supplying the connection for you. And if you're not doing work, you're tying up bandwidth and resources. So they kind of have a right to do that. It depends on the company. The owner at Kinko's thought people should have access. I think I've talked about this before. Because it lowers stress that if you can contact things and do shopping and so forth while you're at work. Firewall, same kind of thing, but it runs on your computer, not between the computer and the internet like that last diagram. This one actually runs on your computer. Only difference. Intrusion detection software Well, that doesn't necessarily, it looks at the signatures and so forth, but it also has, you might call it artificial intelligence, but it has some pattern matching software. It tries to figure out the network traffic. And it reports on vulnerabilities. In other words, it might send out stuff that it's not a virus, but it sends out stuff that operates like a virus and sees if it gets through. Or it analyzes your ports, your entries into your computer. And it also just looks at things and says, why is that going on? There's certain things like IRC, which is Internet Relay Chat. If that's going on a system that shouldn't be doing that, you probably have a Trojan horse. We actually had one of those years ago here. We got rid of it, of course, haven't had any since, but it was there when I took this job. It took me a while to figure out it was there, and we got rid of it. But there was a chat service of some kind, and somebody out there somewhere was using it to relay messages to other sites. We don't know what they were doing with it. We're not sure. But we located it just because we had some intrusion detection software that said, did you know this is running? And of course, it shouldn't have been running. We weren't running it. So it's that kind of thing. That's how it works. It's detecting things going on and kind of giving you a picture of what's going on. All right, so different topics, sort of. Going back to the idea of a building and the perimeter protection or a military base. I spent a lot of time on military bases. When you want to get on the base, they have certain procedures. Same kind of thing with software and computer systems. There's a username. So this would be called something you know. Okay? Different ways you can set security. One of them is things you know. Your username, your PIN. When you use your debit card, that PIN is security. You know that. I know that. We just don't think about it that way often, but that's what it is. It's something you know. Your username and password are a combination that has to match for you to get into your bank. Some banks recently have started, or websites, I shouldn't say just banks, this idea of showing you a picture of some kind that identifies it as them. And, let's see, my mother's bank, I just got access to her bank account, and they had some pictures, mountains and things. I think I chose pencils. That means if I go to a site that's pretending to be them, I better, I won't see that pencil picture. And that'll tell me, this looks like them, but it's not really them. That's another layer that's happening now. But this is something you know. When you go up to my security alarm at my house, when I get home tonight, I'm going to have to key in a code to turn the alarm off. Those are things you know. And that's one way to set security, username and password. Of course, username and password can be stolen, just like a key can, a regular car key or something. But they can be replaced as well, changed very quickly. You ever wonder why they make you do a certain length? Probably not, but you intuitively know that the longer the password is, the more secure it is. Excuse me. But here's a chart that really brings that home. If your password is one character, 36 combinations. What are those, by the way? Well, it's 26 to the alphabet and then 0 through 9. It would take a human 3 minutes on average to figure out what your password is. Okay. Computer, what is that? Tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000, millions, 18 milliseconds. Okay. You get the idea. But there's kind of a cutoff down here. 30 seconds is all it takes a computer to do 5 characters. So if someone's trying to get in, what we're talking about here is randomly assigning a value to each of these 5 characters based on this idea that there's 36 possibilities for each one. The computer can just randomly generate code, just keep sending it till it works. That's what this number over here is based on. 30 seconds, even at 5 characters. When you go above that, it starts getting a lot for a computer. Okay? Notice when it's 10, It takes a human 580 million years, a computer 59 years to figure that out. Of course, unlike the movies where they can just keep, hackers can keep pumping code in there until it works, it doesn't work that way though in reality. If it's a very secure computer, like a military computer or something, that's high level security, if somebody attempts a password, user ID password, more than 3 times, sometimes 2, a human being gets notified. Something prints out, a log prints out, something pops up and says, this person has failed 3 times. And often, the user ID and password are deactivated. You can't use it for the next hour or something. So it isn't that simple anymore, but still, it happens. It doesn't happen on my bank account when I forget my password. It just keeps letting me try it. So that isn't true for all sites. But very secure ones it is. If you're interested in this kind of thing, there's an old, there's a book that's very interesting about this stuff. And let me go over to the whiteboard to write this. It'll work better. Called The Cuckoo's Egg. By Clifford Stoll. And as you may or may not know, cuckoos lay their eggs in other birds' nests and have them raise them. They don't raise their own babies. It's just an evolutionary process. They figured out that works better than actually feeding their own young. And in most cases, their babies are bigger than the other ones, and they chuck the other birds out. The other birds have this instinct to feed what's in their nest, so they bring them up. Well, that's where this title came from. This was in the early days, the 70s actually, of computers and computer security, and we didn't know much about what was going on or how to protect and so forth. The internet was there. We didn't have the web, really. But this guy, Clifford Stoll, used to be an astrophysicist, astronomer, and he got tired of that, so he just became a computer operator at night. And it's a very long story, but essentially he found like a discrepancy between 2 log files every night, and he just was bored, decided to figure out why. He eventually figured out somebody was hacking he worked on a military base, into the base. He kept working on this for literally a year. Eventually, he figured out the signal was coming from a military base. They wouldn't believe him. He kept pushing that wall, and eventually he got somebody there to listen to him, and so forth and so on. It all had to do with like an 8-millisecond difference between 2 logs. And he just figured out something was wrong, and somebody was monkeying with the logs. They were getting in and resetting things so there wouldn't be notice. What they finally end up doing is arresting a whole group of Soviet spies in Hamburg, Germany, because of this 8-millisecond difference, and this person's perseverance. They track it down finally to a place in Hamburg, and they arrested him, and they spent a lot of time in jail. This was during the Cold War, of course, so it was a much bigger deal than it might be now. So what is possessed? We talked about what you know, user ID and password. Another level is what you possess. That would be when I was on the military, my military ID. When you go to the library, you have to have a library card. When I go to my bank, I have to have my ATM card. So something you possess. You can actually get these cards now that have electronics, and they talk via satellite. And the only way you can get into your bank, even online, is you look at your card, and it syncs up with the server at the bank, and it gives you a number. You have to type that number in. Well, that number changes every second, every millisecond. So if you logged in 5 minutes later, you're going to get a different number. The idea, of course, is that no one else could get into your account. Even if they knew your user ID, they'd have to have that card. You're going to see that growing, I think. Right now, you have to pay for it $20 at Bank of America, but it gives you a little more security. Your password changes every millisecond, essentially. It's a random number. They mention here something you carry. Okay. Next level, so something you know, something you carry. And that includes the house key, right? You carry that, that's security. The next level, of course, is who you are. Biometric device. I think we've talked a little bit about those before. Biometric device, of course, is you. But the device is reading you. So in this case, what you see here is they're reading this person's fingerprints. They were talking about, I don't know where that stands, but they were talking about putting that on all passports, that you had to have a digitized copy of your fingerprint, so when they could scan your fingerprint when you went to the airport, it had to match the digital copy on your passport. I think they backed off on that, but still talk about doing that. Notice they're also taking a picture of this person, and the two have to agree in the database and so forth. They also have face recognition software. It doesn't work real well. Voice recognition, voice signature they mentioned here. The iris of your eye. They'll look at what they look at there is the arteries in the back of your eye. They have a pattern, and that doesn't change over time. And we're not talking about what happens when you have a little too much to drink or haven't slept. Those are surface blood vessels. We're talking about the ones in the back of the eye. And they're actually, they say, more accurate than fingerprints. However, you got to put your eye up to something, and they have to have very sophisticated equipment. So that's a biometric device. Probably one day we'll be using DNA. So they'll take a skin cell and, excuse me, okay. They'll tell you, it won't be long before they'll actually be matching the DNA of your skin or something with the database having your DNA. Of course, all that stuff works fairly well until somebody hacks into the computer and changes the DNA on the computer, the digital copy. But that's a whole other deal. I'm not going to talk much about this. You can, a lot of people use this stuff. They certainly have them at Kinko's and places where everything's tied down with something. Some of them have something in here when it moves, a buzz goes off. There's a real-time location system, LoJack for computers. Essentially, LoJack is something that locates where your car is via satellite. That's similar to this. Somebody steals it, there's something inside the computer. GPS, right? If you have GPS in your phone and somebody steals it, you can track it. Same kind of thing here. We talked about software theft, illegally taking copies, called piracy. To get around that, the companies have this thing called a licensing agreement, which is kind of bogus when you think about it. Nobody reads this stuff, but I guess it's legally binding in some way, shape, or form. The truth is, you don't own the software you run on your computer. You've just agreed to use it under certain agreements. The license agreement. What you purchase is a license to use the software. You don't purchase the software. Why do they do that? Well, they do that because then you don't own it. Because if you actually owned it, you could give it to somebody else, couldn't you? You can give your car to somebody. So they're very careful about that in legalese terms, that when you purchase Microsoft Office, you're not purchasing Microsoft Office. You're purchasing a license to use Microsoft Office. Okay, that's the difference. And that's why they have to go through this. And nobody reads this stuff except the lawyers that write it. But it's all part of the process now. It has to be there. Product activation. That's just another level of security. Years ago, you could take Windows, install it 8 million times in 8 million computers. And that's when things were on disks and so forth. Now, of course, you want to register your software so you can get the updates. That has helped reduce piracy a lot. People tend to want to pay now to get the updates. Before, who cared? You always had to go buy a new version. When there was a new version of Windows, you went and bought a box and installed it. And I'm including updates. You couldn't do updates via the internet because the connections were very bad and slow. But once they were able to do that online like we do now, it reduced piracy an awful lot, because you could get a copy perhaps of software But you wouldn't get the updates because you didn't have some kind of activation code or it wasn't a real copy and so forth. Another security protection is encryption. And this is a very interesting chart. Here's the ways we do that. What you have here is the message. Here's what it looks like after it's encrypted. Encryption just means you change the message based on an algorithm, based on a pattern that the sender knows and the receiver knows, so that the message being sent is converted, and then you unconvert it at the other end, knowing how it was converted. Transposition, you just reverse, the S and the O are reversed, the T and the F were reversed, and so forth. They're swapped. Why does that work so well? Well, people that are intercepting messages usually have software looking for key code words. And if you do this, that's not a key code word in anybody's book. Okay? That's the idea, basically. And a human might see that and not realize what it is. Substitution, each letter is replaced with another. The information becomes this. That works really well. Each side knows what replacements are. Otherwise, they have to randomly try to figure it out. Expansion, you put a Y after every character. And remove characters. Every third letter removed. And put somewhere else. And then it's put back in later. So you break the message apart, essentially, and put it back together later. Now, a computer could probably bust in. These are very simple examples. They don't really work this way. They're much more complicated, and you're probably going to combine 2 or 3 of those and other stuff as well. And what you replace letters with in this case may change from second to second and those kinds of things. It's very difficult. Here's kind of a fun way to, if you want to teach this kind of thing. You've probably seen this, but just in case. If I can remember this. Something like this. This is replacing letters with symbols. So my name would be is the R O B. It's a very simple code, and it looks like Egyptian hieroglyphics when you write it out. It's kind of fun. My grandkids really like it. You can play around with it. It's kind of a decoder, coder thing. And of course, you could take this in and maybe do it backwards. A lot of different things. The dots in these boxes, of course, differentiate them from those. These 2 have dots, so they're down here. This one has no dot, so it's up here. You get it. That's the same kind of thing as transposition we were talking about. Of course, with computers, it happens much faster. During World War II, there was a thing called the Enigma machine. I think I talked about it before. And some of you might have written your paper on the guy that busted that code for the Germans, figured out how to bust the code. And we knew what the Germans were doing before, as soon as they did. And it was a very big deal. Helped us win the war. From Russia with Love, the James Bond movie, he's trying to steal a similar machine. So that's encryption. And if you go into your browser, you can look at internet options, and there's levels of encryption in there. Usually people take the default. I remember when the browsers themselves encrypt software, or encrypt the messages. So that the message being sent through the cloud of the internet isn't sent just out flat out, it's sent encrypted. And you can turn that on and off, but most people leave it on. And I remember when we went to 64-bit encryption for Internet Explorer instead of 32-bit. Became much more secure. Email. Well, email isn't very secure no matter what you do, but there is certain encryption which happens. Most people use, it's actually called pretty good privacy. Most people abbreviate it PGP, pretty good privacy, because it sounds better than saying pretty good privacy. But it's used in a lot of email encryption programs use it. And now the latest, of course, is digital signatures. And the idea there is everybody, every person has a digital signature of some kind that says, this is who I am, and you register that signature on the internet. And you'll see this when you do Windows updates. You often get digital signatures being updated because Windows uses them a lot. And the idea here is, of course, you know your software then can say, oh, I know who that is based on the digital signature. I'll accept that mail. You know, eventually we're going to get to the point, hopefully, with email. And the guy that invented email wishes he'd add more to this originally. We wouldn't have spam. If we can get this really working as well as it should, spam could be reduced because you could actually tell your system who to accept email from and who not to accept it from. Bill Gates, about a year and a half ago, was recommending that we do this kind of thing so that spam would be eliminated. He also recommended that we charge for email, even if it's just 1/10 of a penny or a penny, but that charge wouldn't happen if you accepted the email. In other words, if you get an email from someone and say, no, I don't want to accept that, that person that sent it gets charged. If you accept it, nobody gets charged. Seemed like a good idea to try to figure out how exactly that's going to happen. But see, Bill Gates really doesn't understand that kind of thing. He just has these visionary things. Hard to implement some of the things he thinks of. But digital signatures, the idea is handshakes. I know who this is, just like your written signature. This identifies you to the computers. And the browsers, like Internet Explorer, Mosaic, Opera, Mozilla, encrypt the messages themselves. A secure website, you're going to see this. Oops. Instead of HTTP, you'll see HTTPS for secure. And that's another layer of encryption. And a lot of websites use that. You may not be aware of it. Sometimes you type in a non-secure website, but it switches you to a secure one once you get in there. Banks do that, of course. You just type in bankofamerica.com, but it usually uses this HTTPS. In order to use that protocol, remember it's Hypertext Transaction Protocol Secure. I think that's what the S is. Your browser has to be able to handle that. So it's also an issue. And they also use digital certificates to guarantee the website is who it says it is. And there is ways to certify who you are using digital certificates, it's called. And that's a growing thing as well. You actually have to get registered, but when you are, and a lot of people use that, companies use that to make sure they're talking to who they think they're talking to. Kind of like certified letters, if you will. System failure, hardware, natural disasters, and so forth. How do you prevent that? This is one of the ways. When we had the lightning strike a couple hours ago, we had our servers on surge protectors. Actually, they were on UPSs, on an interruptible power supply. They didn't even know anything happened. Power supply handled the surge, but it also, when the power went off, and the lights did go off briefly, the UPS has batteries, and it just kept the same level of power, so the server never even knew there was a problem. So it's a way to isolate you. Plus, there's power backup. So even if the power went off, I think ours lasts for 2 hours perhaps. Our server keeps running on battery for up to 2 hours without other power. Most UPS don't run that long. They just run for long enough so you can shut the system down normally without problems. So that might be 10 minutes, 15. But at least you can shut the system down, wait till power comes back, and then boot it normally. That's one way you protect it. The other, of course, we've talked about before, backups. You take all the data off your computer, put it somewhere else. And I'm not going to go over this much detail. We looked at it before. A full backup is you copy everything. Disadvantages, it's everything. It takes a long time to not only back it up, but to take it off, to put it back. Selective backup, just important files. That's what we do on our Adobe Connect server. We just take our Adobe Connect files, which includes all the recordings, Flash files, XML, and so forth, and we back those up to a separate external disk. And then, of course, what you do if the system blows up or you have a fire, key component of backup is to store your backup somewhere else. Or if you have a fire, you've lost your backup too. So that's an issue most people don't think about. If you do a little research, you'll find out that a lot of the companies that were in the World Trade Center when the planes hit it went out of business because they didn't have backups for their data. They didn't know who their customers are. They didn't know what their customers owed them. They didn't know what they owed their creditors. They were done. They essentially had to start over and build their customer database again. Now, of course, they knew some of them, and some of them would call them, you know, but they didn't have that database, that traction, that move. So a lot of them went out of business and started over. The ones that had backup were able to start almost immediately. The next day, they were in business. Wi-Fi. When you do your Wi-Fi at home, I have one, a lot of people have them, you want to use this at a minimum. Protected access. And that essentially forces whoever connects to it to have a password, code word, whatever you want to call it. A key is what they call it when you set it up. That recognized by the device sending out the wireless and receiving your wireless back from your computer. So your computer has to know that key, and it sends it when it logs into the transmitter receiver. But once you set it up in a profile on your wireless software on your laptop or whatever you're using, you only set it up once, and it's embedded, so when you connect, it sends it for you. You don't have to type it every time. You can get more sophisticated, but I think that's all you need for a home wireless network. For a long time, my neighbor, I've told you about that. This is a standard that has security built into it. Uses more sophisticated encryption than WPA. Most people are using WPA, though, these days at home. Businesses, of course, use the higher standards. Ethics. Like I said, we're not going to talk too much about this. But it is something our society is dealing with. Companies are limiting people's access to the internet and email and certain things at work because lots of reasons. One is obsessive compulsive types of behaviors. Some people check their email over and over and over, and it's a way of avoiding work. It's just something to think about. And so some companies are having, you can't do that yourself. It's just that when you get an email, it goes into a folder, and they only allow certain addresses to come in related to work. But you can't check it manually. There's other behaviors like shopping too much at work or just browsing the internet, looking at your fantasy baseball team. How far does a company go to let you do these sorts of things? Depends on the work environment and what's going on and so forth. But there is a cost. It takes bandwidth. Nothing else. Your computer at your desk can handle it perhaps because you're only doing certain things. When I do video editing, for instance, on my computer here at work, I don't do anything else. I don't have email running. Because it takes all the resources on my computer. When I'm not running something like that, I may have my email up. I may be looking at websites and things related to work, perhaps, some not so much. But it's taking a bandwidth. So the university has to get a bigger bandwidth to allow those kind of things. So there is a cost. The question is how we deal with it and how the company deals with it. In my mind, it always comes down to what the policy is. And it should be clearly stated so that you can't get fired for something you weren't aware of. Some of it's obvious. I've seen cases at Kinko's. People would never bring a porno magazine and sit at their desk and look at it. But several times guys got fired for looking at porn on their computer at their desktop. Why would you? What's the difference? I've never understood that, but we have this separation somehow between the internet and what went before it somehow. You don't see as much of that as you did when the internet first started. People thought they were anonymous. Remember, you're not anonymous at work. They know which computer accesses what on the internet. We talked about theft. Information accuracy. Now there's an interesting one. Let's see if I can get back to where it was here. Hang on. Boy. One second. Boy. We talked about software theft. That's part of the ethics, and I think that's changing. Companies are doing software a little differently than they used to. They actually don't secure software as much as they used to. They're doing it more by requiring people to have codes and through updates, making updates dependent on having a valid copy of the software. But it still goes on, and I mentioned that there are periodically audits of big corporations that happen. Okay, here we are. Information accuracy I was talking about as well, that's right. So that's part of the ethical privacy thrust because since all the information is digitized, since it's available to people, it's very important to us that it's accurate. So if someone's going to store my information, ethically, they should be responsible for making sure it's accurate. If they're going to put it on the web, it better be accurate. So it's an ethical situation we haven't really dealt too much with in the court systems yet. Just because something's on the web, is it accurate? Of course not. We all know that. But if it is at a medical institution, people are going to assume it's accurate. It may or may not be. So who gets that information, how it gets disseminated, and how it's made available is very crucial. One of the reasons I don't allow, for instance, Wikipedia to be used as references for what you do for this class is it's not verified. Anybody can add information to Wikipedia, whatever they want, and people do it all the time. People try to sabotage certain parts of it. I think I mentioned it before, but Mark Cuban, the guy that owns the Dallas Mavericks, started his life in college developing internet radio, and that's how he got wealthy. But now he has a person on his staff whose job it is to look at Wikipedia more than once a day and look at his profile on there and make sure it's accurate. Somebody puts something in there, and anybody can post anything to Wikipedia. There's nobody editing it. He goes in there and changes it. That's the other side of it. He can take the stuff out or correct it if it's wrong. So it's those kinds of things. There is an ethical privacy issue involved with this. If somebody puts something in a database somewhere and it becomes available to someone else, it should be accurate. And it's an issue we haven't figured out yet. Property rights. Well, you know, that the best example of that, of course, is the music downloads. If you make a copy of something you've downloaded and burn it on a CD for a buddy, you've just stolen the income for whoever made that music. That's at least the way the industry looks at it. I don't think it's quite true. I mean, some people wouldn't buy that CD if they had to pay for it, but if somebody's going to give it to them free, they might listen to it. I don't know. It's not a complete 100% change, but it is their right to say who gets it and who doesn't. People like Metallica, for instance, have been working on this for years, trying to prevent this kind of thing, and even pirated recordings at their concerts, video and audio. They've tried hard to make sure that didn't happen. What they do now is they have contests, and whoever wins them gets to record their concerts, and I don't know how they handle the other stuff. There's been some talk with professors in terms of distance education and intellectual property rights. Some people won't do distance read recordings because they're afraid their image and what they say is going to get out there forever. And it reduces their value. They see their value as a professor, as a teacher, as an instructor, is here. It's their body, it's their brain, it's what they say. And that's their value. It isn't, and what they know, of course, up here, but it's also how you present it. If that gets recorded, they've lost something. Their value has been reduced. That's how some people think of it. I don't, but a lot of people do, and it's kind of understandable, actually. That's an intellectual property right issue as well. So those are things that we haven't really figured out yet, and we're still dealing with. Information privacy, we've talked, you know what that is. They just arrested somebody recently in Albuquerque who was stealing mail out of people's mailboxes. Why would you do that? Well, credit card numbers, bank statements. If you can get somebody's bank statement with the checks in it, this is why banks don't normally send checks anymore. They're trying to reduce that. Because if they get one of your checks, they can mail it into one of these check companies and get a box of checks. It looks just like yours. Same account number and everything. Happened to me once. I don't know how they got the original check, but they got a whole box of them. And that didn't happen because of the internet, but it did happen. So it's happening all around. Privacy. You have a right to restrict the collection and use of your information. It doesn't seem that way anymore, does it? What about the credit bureaus? They're collecting information on us all the time. But did anybody ask you? No. So why do they have the right to do that and then give that information to whoever asks for it? We don't question that anymore in this country. We're all just accepted it. Well, 10 years ago, that was a big issue. People were constantly going down to the credit bureaus, and they had to give you your information free if you went down. And if you were refused because of a credit report, you had to be notified. And if you were refused, you had the right to go down and see your credit report. And we're just kind of now snowed these days, all these ads on TV and about credit reports, and it seems like it's out of our hands now. What they tell you is, well, if you act right, you shouldn't worry about it. Well, perhaps we ought to take a step back and say, what difference does that make? I don't want you collecting that information. We've gone beyond that, and we, as a society, as a legal system, we've just accepted the fact that that's going to happen because our system thinks it won't work without it. How can we do business if we don't know somebody's credit risk? I mean, it's getting bad now. They won't even give you insurance if you have bad credit. You know, I think it's going a little too far. And I know there's a lot of you out there that think I'm nuts, that, well, they have a right not to give you insurance if you have bad credit. Perhaps. I don't understand why. As long as I'm paying my insurance premiums, what difference does it make? Well, what it does, it allows them to charge more for insurance of people that have bad credit. I don't have that problem, but I just don't think it's right. Who decided this? I didn't decide somebody could keep those records. You understand? Difficult because data is digitized. What about employee monitoring? A few years ago, that was not allowed in the workplace. The company couldn't do it. People would take them to court. Well, not anymore. Everything you do on your computer is monitored at work, pretty much. Some companies have cameras watching people. But some collect everything you type in a key buffer and send it somewhere. It's just a lot of things go on. And we've pretty much accepted that now because the idea is the company owns the infrastructure They're paying for everything. You should be doing work, so they have a right to monitor what you're doing. I think I've come around to that one. I used to kind of resent it. Now I've realized, no, it makes perfect sense. They monitor me in so many other ways. They should be allowed to monitor the computer use as well. They monitor the phone use. I'm used to that. So I think that's a legitimate one. That's just my opinion. It is legal. I have to tell you about it. Your personal information. This is kind of an interesting graph here. These are really good ideas. Only do absolutely what's necessary in forms. That's one I do often. I also have this technique where when I'm asked to fill in my first name, I always put a space in my middle initial in the first name. Never you put the middle initial where it's supposed to go. And you can play games with that. Some people embed certain letters in their name or in their first name or as a middle initial to tell them this address came from this form I filled in. So if you get mailings with that name on it, you'll know who sold it to them. You can do that. I've done that. Middle initial of Z means I filled it in for Rolling Stone magazine subscription. If all of a sudden I start getting mailings with my middle initial as a Z, I know who sold it to them. So you can do that. But only give them what's necessary. I usually key in a bogus phone number. They're smart enough now that you can't put any number. They know that doesn't work. So I just give them a random number usually. Why should I give them a phone number for, you know? Frequent shopper cards. Don't use them if you want to protect your information. I use them. I just don't give them all my right information. When I fill in the form, I put in bogus address and phone number. You know, you can do that and still use the cards. Whenever there's a box that says don't distribute, click it. Same thing here. Cookies, we haven't talked about those. We'll talk about them in a minute. But cookies are, when you're browsing on the internet, what they are files that keep track of what you've done on that website. Keep track of who you are, your age, your preferences, areas you visit on their website, those kinds of things. So next time you log into their website, they pull up that cookie and they can say, "Hi, Rob, how are you today?" That kind of thing. You don't have to type anything in. They know who you are. They know what you bought last time. Here's your recommendations. Those kinds of things. Cookies are valuable for you if you like that kind of service. So there are ways for continuity to happen from each visit of the web, for instance. They're also used, of course, in different ways by spyware. We'll talk about that in a minute. They keep track of what you do, then they upload it, and they do marketing analysis. So you might want to, there are ways to filter cookies. Clear your history browser in your browser. And that's the history of sites you visited. I clear that out once in a while just because. Why not? Why keep it there? I use I have an email account at Yahoo I use for nothing except when I need to get information via email from something or I need to register an email. I usually make up an email address, but if I really want something from them, I'll use my Yahoo account so I don't give it into my personal account. And sometimes I'll create a new Yahoo email account to use because that one's getting full and I just ignore that one from that time forward. I don't care. Don't share your disk. You can do that on some music sharing sites. Don't do it. It allows people access to your hard disk. They can put things on it, take things off. Don't do it. Firewall, we talked about that. I have an email account I pay for, and they take care of all the spam. I get very little spam at that account, and they also do virus checking. I mean, Comcast, I have Comcast at home internet, and they take care of a lot of that stuff too, and they take care also of virus checking. Even though I don't even know what's going on, they don't allow a lot of that stuff through to my home. I also have protection on my computer in my home, but they take care of a lot of that for me. Never, ever, 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 ever respond to spam, even if you think, you know, I might like those shoes. Don't do it through the email. Go somewhere else and look it up if you want to, if you really need to have those shoes, but don't reply to the email. That's dangerous in several ways. It encourages them, but it also gives them your email, gives them, in a sense, access to your computer. All of a sudden, you're in their database. This person actually exists. They responded. You think you're going to get less or more spam if you do that? Even if you want the product, find another way to find the product. Don't do it through the email. There are programs that allow you to surf the web anonymously that doesn't leave your IP behind or anything else. I don't do that, but some people do. They're worried about it. It's really good advice. If you'd like to know how to, you can, well, heck. If we go here, the internet options, tools, internet options, browsing history. You can delete it right here. If you delete it, what that means is as you type in a web address, sometimes you type in 1 or 2 letters and it pops up for you. It isn't going to pop up. You're going to have to type the whole thing. But once you type it in, it's now in the history. Next time it'll pop up. So it's just a way to clear things out. There's also a way to delete temporary files. Where's that? You can set, this is Windows security, and I'm not going to go into it, but if you're interested, you might look into that. Here's the certificates, SSL, a secure socket layer. Worry about that. All right. There is a way, I'm not seeing it right now. Here's the temporary, this is what I was looking for. You can delete this. You can tell it how long to keep pages in your history down here, 20 days in this case, how much disk space to use, and so forth. You can delete the temporary files completely. When I pressed, let me cancel that. If I go back, browsing history. I clicked on delete. This page comes up. You can delete the temporary internet files. Those are working files that the internet uses, and I would delete those occasionally. If I were you, I do. Cookies, you can delete those. History, delete those. Data, when you type in a name, your name pops up. Passwords, you can delete all of those. And I suggest you do it periodically. All right. Your profile is kind of your behavior on the internet. Think about it that way. And who you are, age, behavior. And that behavior, of course, is part of marketing. Very important on the internet. So that can be sold. Cookie, I mentioned that. Your preferences, what you do, you can read through this. Your browsing habits, that's stored on your hard disk if you let it be. And there's levels. You can say store the cookie without telling me. You can say warn me when a cookie's being added or changed. And you can say, okay, allow that one, don't allow this one. Or you can just not allow cookies at all. Does that mean you can't browse Amazon? No, Amazon works without cookies. It just works better with cookies, that's all. And this is the explanation of how cookies work. I'm not going to go into that. Spyware is programs that are embedded on your computer without you knowing about it, and they keep track of your behavior. Generally, spyware doesn't do anything malicious except invade your privacy in the background and use resources. They're spying on you, spyware, what your behavior is and so forth, but they're also transmitting that information back up to a server somewhere. What's the point of spying if you don't send the information? So, again, it's using resources, using bandwidth. If you have 300 spyware programs, as my mother did, that's using a lot of your resources. You got to get rid of those. I use a program called SpyBot. Free, wonderful program. On all our systems here and my personal computers, I update it once a week. And there's a thing you can do where it has passive checks. It embeds things in your browser that warns you if a spyware package is trying to get installed on your computer, and says, you can either have it just block it or tell you, and then you can tell it whether to block or not. And then it also has, that's called immunization. And it also has a step I run, just scans like antivirus, but it scans my computer for spyware once a week. Adware is a program on your computer system that displays advertisement. And we all pretty much know what spam is. And your email package, of course, should filter some of the spam. Outlook does it to an extent. But remember, one of the drawbacks of anti-spam programs and email filtering is sometimes good messages get put in the spam. So you might need to look at that. I rarely delete my spam without at least scanning it quickly. Sometimes good messages get put in there. We've all gotten these. Looks like it's from Bank of America, but it's not. Looks like it's from PayPal. I've been getting some of those lately, but it's not. There's a lot of things that go on. And they have the logo. They took it right off their website. And when the link says bankofamerica.com, but hidden under that link is, you know, some address in Kazakhstan. And if you click on it, it sucks information off your computer. Or if you give them information, it saves it. So that's phishing. Here's a list of privacy laws. Okay. Privacy laws. Okay. This is similar to a firewall, but it's more specifically a way to filter what's going on your system. And you can go in there and say, I don't want this site ever to be seen on my computer again. It's filtering the content. Recently in China, there was a fight between Google and China. They wanted every computer coming into the country that had browsers in it to have content filtering in them. So the Chinese government then could really filter things because it would be embedded right in the operating system and right embedded in the software of the browser. The Chinese government would decide what was in there. There's a big battle, and then companies refused to do it and tried to negotiate, and finally the Chinese government dropped that requirement. Health concerns, I don't worry. I mean, I have repetitive strain in my elbow from driving too much recently. It's just the kind of thing, if you do the same movement over and over, it does something to your body. The difference between carpal tunnel and tendonitis, they tend to get confused. One is the nerves, actually. The nerves just have fired so many times in the same way that they can't stop, essentially, and they don't work. I have tendonitis, really. I don't have carpal tunnel. Sometimes this clicks from driving too much. If I stretch it, it kind of goes away. No big deal. Computer addiction, we all know people like that. Stretch, don't do the same thing without moving. Pretty obvious stuff. There are certain things. I'm not going to talk about those. Yeah, green computing, good stuff. Okay. So that's pretty much our topic for tonight. We talked about the risks, how to help safeguard. And the chapter of the book covers this in a little more detail. No assignment for this chapter, but if you have any questions or you want to discuss it, post something in the forum and we can discuss it, okay? I think that's all I have for now. I'm going to do a lecture on assignment 4 and then kind of a summary of everything, and that's all you're going to have to watch, okay? Thank you very much.